California had a long-standing fear of migrants coming into the state. They had actually had a program of keeping them out, of putting their marshals on the border and turning them back. That was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. So when EPIC came along, they were very worried that this would attract criminals, bums, other undesirables. But in actual fact, the people that were going to California in that period were chiefly dislocated farmers who had been forced out by the drought, as well as the usual unemployed person looking for work, that were drawn to California partly by the old tradition of American homesteaders that if you moved west, you'd find some way to support yourself. Oh, sure. It was a part of the job. It was constant. This kind of fear, which was aggravated in California, was really a part of the whole transient job. We never opened any camp or any center that we did not have not in my backyard kind of reaction, just as we do today for the homeless. There was a basic fear. The transients who traveled on the trains were mostly single men and young men. They had to be to hop on and off of the trains because there were guards that tried to keep them off. The families came generally in old jalopies that they had managed to put together to make the trip. Those were the chief means of travel. There were never as many transients as people had predicted there were going to be, but those that moved, we tended to extol their traditional virtues of seeking work, that this was the American way. You went west to look for work, and we praised that. We did not have resources to develop an educational campaign. Whenever we were asked to speak or write, we always said these were just unemployed people looking for work. Our chief satisfaction was in feeding and keeping people alive, because these were the most despairing people, the most displaced. It was frustrating because we might train people for something. We had projects that did, but there were no jobs for them to go to. So without a permanent source of employment, it was frustrating. When the defense program came along later, we could place people, and then it was more rewarding. The Depression of the 30s was such a cataclysmic event, with millions displaced from work, no jobs for students getting out of school, families with no source of relief, empty ice boxes, crying children, that it created an atmosphere of emergency which affected the whole New Deal operation. All of us who were there were constantly aware of this vast cataclysmic event in the country with which we were trying to deal, in my case on an emergency basis, in others of my young colleagues for more permanent institutional arrangements. But we never lost sight of the fact that these were people. We didn't have very good figures on unemployment in those days. People figured anywhere up to 20 million unemployed. I was very young. Many of my colleagues were very young. Most of these young people, who today are corporation lawyers and so forth, were on their first job. We were filled with zeal, enthusiasm, drive, anxiety, all of the emotions in one great turmoil of activity. We talked. We never thought of anything else but our jobs. That was just the way life was. Washington at that time was like a small town. It hadn't grown as it is now. So we all knew each other. A lot of us lived in Georgetown, would go to each other's houses. Again, always talking about our work. I'm just trying to think how I'll say that. When the defense program came into effect, it relieved us of much of the pressure on our program, but at the same time it left us feeling that we had not fulfilled all our wishes as to a permanent program. Of course, we transferred our energies to the defense program and became absorbed in it, but still there was a nostalgic harking back to the days of hope and the New Deal, when we thought we were going to construct a new society. The defense program was itself enormously difficult, preoccupying for the people who worked in it. But many of them who came out of the New Deal had a feeling of nostalgia for the hopes of the New Deal period, when we thought we were going to create new institutions that would prevent this from happening again. The defense program was enormously demanding of the country, but many of us felt that unfinished business remained from the New Deal to make permanent and adequate the institutions that we started. The defense program was an enormous venture, and many of the New Dealers, most of them in fact, moved over either to the military or to the defense production programs. But at the same time, they had a great nostalgia for the early days of the New Deal, when their hopes and dreams were centered on creating new institutions, which were begun in the New Deal, but not fully completed according to these dreamers, and had to remain in quiescence during the war years until a new generation could pick them up and carry them forward.